At 3:47 hours, a frozen tree line outside St. Vive, Belgium. December 21st, 1944. The forest was screaming. Not men. Not yet. Metal. Tracer fire ripping bark off oaks 100 years older than the war trying to kill them. Snow that wasn't white anymore churned black and red where the first mortar round had landed 20 seconds ago. Private Elijah Marrow was on his back in a foxhole 2 feet too shallow, and his hands were doing something his brain hadn't caught up to yet. His left hand moved to his boot, just for a second. Then it moved away. There wasn't time. Somewhere above him in the dark, a German assault line was walking through the trees like they already owned the ground. 28 of them, maybe 30. He'd stopped counting after the flares went up. Behind him, nothing. No support line. No radio that worked. No second American voice for 400 yards in any direction. He had 6 seconds and a jammed weapon. What happened in the next 90 minutes would end up in a report that got filed, misfiled, and forgotten for 40 years. It would end with a German officer standing in the wreckage of his own advance, staring at one shallow hole in the ground, unable to explain to his own command what had happened to a third of his company. But that's the end. Right now, Elijah Marrow was looking at a Browning automatic rifle with a burst barrel, a Thompson with 6 rounds left, and a dead man's carbine 3 feet away that he couldn't reach without standing up. 3 broken weapons, 1 idea, and no time to be wrong about it. What was in his boot? Why did his hand go there, and why did he stop himself? You're about to find out. But first, you need to understand exactly how impossible the next 90 minutes really were. To understand what Elijah Marrow was facing at 3:47 hours, you have to understand what he wasn't supposed to be facing at all. Marrow served in a quartermaster truck company, one of the segregated logistics units the U.S. Army relied on to keep the entire front moving, and one of the units the Army insisted on paper would never see direct combat. Black soldiers in December 1944 were driving trucks, hauling ammunition, running the Red Ball Express routes that kept Patton's tanks fed with fuel. They were not, according to the doctrine sitting in a folder in Washington, riflemen. The Battle of the Bulge didn't care about the folder. When the German Ardennes offensive tore through the American line on December 16th, it didn't just break through combat divisions. It broke through supply routes, engineer battalions, truck companies, anyone standing between the Wehrmacht and the Meuse River. Entire American units found themselves suddenly on the front line whether Washington had planned for it or not. Marrow's convoy was one of them. Cut off outside St. Vive when the road forward collapsed and the road back was already crawling with German armor, 17 men from a supply company were suddenly asked to hold a position against elements of a Volksgrenadier company advancing under cover of night and fog, the same fog that had grounded Allied air support for 4 straight days. Here is the math nobody wanted to say out loud. 17 truck drivers, cooks, and mechanics. Standard issue small arms, most of them never zeroed for combat range. No mortars, no machine gun crew, no wire, no prepared positions because nobody had planned for a defensive line here. Against them, a reinforced German platoon close to 30 men, moving with the discipline of soldiers who had done this before, MP40s, a general-purpose machine gun team, at least 1 Panzerfaust. Trained infantry against men who, 3 days earlier, had been checking tire pressure. Enemy POV. OBRLUTNANTKLAUSRENNER. Forest Edge. 3:10 hours. Renner checks his watch and does not think about the Americans as a threat. Intelligence says logistics troops, poorly armed, poorly led. He tells his sergeant this will be finished before sunrise, a formality on the way to the fuel depot at St. Vive. He orders the advance in 3 staggered lines, standard doctrine, no urgency in his voice. Somewhere behind him, a corporal jokes about how many Americans will simply run. Renner does not laugh, but he does not disagree either. He has done this 11 times since Normandy. He expects a 12th. By 3:30, 6 of Marrow's 17 men were already wounded or dead. The senior NCO on the position, a staff sergeant named Halloran who had never once addressed Marrow by name, only by a slur he used so casually it had stopped registering as violence and started registering as weather, gave the order that ended any pretense of a coordinated defense. Fall back to the crossroads. Every man for himself. He didn't wait to see who followed. 6 men did. 2 more went down before they reached the tree line. That left Elijah Marrow, 1 bar with a barrel that had taken shrapnel, a Thompson nearly dry, and a battlefield that every rational calculation said was already lost. This is the moment military historians, when they finally found this report decades later, would circle in red ink. Not because of what Marrow did next, that comes later. Because of what he chose not to do. He didn't run. To understand why a 22-year-old truck driver stayed in a foxhole that every survival instinct told him to abandon, you have to go back 9 years, to a 1-room forge behind a house in Talladega County, Alabama, where his father repaired plow blades and shotguns for anyone in the county who would pay him, which, in 1935, was not very many people, and paid him even less than they should have. Elijah's father, Isaiah Marrow, wasn't a gunsmith by trade. He was a blacksmith who happened to understand metal the way some men understand horses, by feel, by sound, by the particular way iron protests before it gives. When farmers brought in double barrels with cracked stocks or worn firing pins, Isaiah fixed them because fixing things was what kept food on the table, and because he found something close to peace in it. He never said much while he worked. He didn't have to. Elijah, 7 years old and too small to be useful, would sit on an overturned bucket in the corner of that forge for hours, watching his father's hands that had survived a childhood accident with a runaway wagon wheel, and come out permanently scarred across the right palm, a thick ridge of tissue that never fully softened. The boy asked once why his father's hand looked like that. Isaiah held it up to the firelight, turned it slowly, like he was showing off something valuable instead of something broken. "Because I didn't let go when I should have," he said. "And I didn't let go when I shouldn't have either. Same hand did both." He didn't explain further. He never did. He just handed the boy a file and told him to smooth the edge of a hinge, and that was as close to a lesson as his father ever gave him. Not instructions, just proximity and the expectation that you paid attention. That scar became something Elijah thought about more than he could explain. A reminder that the same hand, the same decision, could be the thing that ruined you or the thing that saved you, and you often didn't know which until it was already done. By the time Elijah was 14, he could strip and rebuild a bolt-action rifle blind, timing himself against his own best record scratched into the workbench in pencil. By 16, local hunters were bringing him weapons his father wouldn't touch, jammed actions, warped barrels, guns other smiths had given up on, because word had gotten around that the blacksmith's boy had a gift for understanding why a mechanism failed, not just how to patch it. He also learned, early and often, what it cost to be good at something in a place that had already decided what he was allowed to be good at. A county fair marksmanship contest he won at 17, quietly, efficiently, 3 shots inside a silver dollar at 60 yards, ended not with a prize but with the judges disqualifying him on a technicality invented on the spot, while the white contestant who'd placed second collected the trophy Elijah had earned. Nobody apologized. Nobody expected him to say anything about it. He didn't. His father died in 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, from a heart that had been pushed too hard for too many years by too little rest. Elijah inherited the forge, the tools, and a scar he didn't have but understood anyway because grief, he learned, worked on you the same way his father's hand had been worked on. It marked you permanently, and afterward you carried it into every decision that mattered. He enlisted 11 months later. The Army looked at his file, saw a black man from rural Alabama, and assigned him to a truck company without ever asking what he could do with a rifle. He didn't argue. There wasn't a form for that kind of argument, and he'd learned a long time ago which fights were winnable. What he carried overseas, tucked inside his left boot, wrapped in a scrap of oiled cloth, was a small folding multi-tool his father had forged by hand the year before he died, the closest thing to a signature the old man ever made. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't sentimental in any obvious way. It was a tool, exactly like everything his father ever gave him, and Elijah touched the boot before every convoy run, never took it out, never showed it to anyone as a way of asking a dead man's permission before doing something that required steady hands. He never told anyone in his unit what it was. Some things you didn't explain to men who'd already decided who you were before you opened your mouth. If this story is landing for you, a like helps more people find it back to the fight. By 3:55 hours, Elijah Marrow was alone with a weapon that no longer worked the way it was designed to. The Bar Browning automatic rifle, the closest thing his position had to real firepower, had taken a fragment across the gas cylinder during the mortar barrage. It could still fire, technically. It could not fire reliably, which in a sustained engagement was the same thing as not firing at all. Every third round required him to manually clear the action, and every second he spent doing that was a second the advancing line closed the distance. At 4:02 hours, the first German fire team reached the tree line 40 yards out. He heard them before he saw them, boots in snow, the particular metallic clink of a machine gun team setting up a tripod. He had one working weapon, a Thompson with a magazine he'd already counted twice, because counting was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking, and a dead man's M1 carbine lying in the open where Halloran had dropped it before running. By 4:15, he had fired his last full magazine and reloaded from stripped rounds pulled off a corpse. At 4:28, the machine gun team found his position's approximate location and started walking rounds through the tree line above his head, close enough that bark and ice rained down with every burst. He pressed himself flat against the frozen dirt wall of the foxhole and felt, for the first time since this had started, the specific fear of a man who understands his position is not a fight anymore. It's a countdown. This is where the story gets complicated, where the clean version of heroism stops being available to him. 20 yards to his left, half conscious in the snow, was a German soldier, young, maybe 19, hit by fragments from the same mortar round that had crippled Merrow's bar. He was alive. He was making noise, and the noise was drawing the attention of his own advancing unit toward the exact stretch of tree line where Merrow was dug in. Merrow made a decision in about 4 seconds, and he made it without speaking, without hesitating in any way a camera would have caught as dramatic. He didn't move to help the wounded soldier. He didn't move to silence him either. He simply noted, with the same flat calculation his father used to diagnose a cracked barrel, that the wounded man's position and the noise he was making were pulling German fire toward that spot and away from Merrow's own, and he let it happen. He shifted his own position 12 feet to the right, using the confusion as cover, while the German platoon's attention stayed fixed on their own wounded man for the better part of 90 seconds. 90 seconds is not nothing when you have nothing. The narrator will not tell you whether that was right. The record doesn't say Merrow ever spoke about it, and he never explained it to anyone afterward. It happened. It bought him time he used to survive the next hour. That's what's true, and that's all that's true. At 09:15 the following context becomes relevant, but understand, all of this took place in the space of one night. 3:47 to roughly 5:30. Less than 2 hours. It felt to the one man living through it like it had no end. By 4:41 hours, Elijah Merrow had a working Thompson with 4 rounds, a jammed bar, a dead man's carbine with an unknown number of rounds left in its magazine, and 30 seconds before the machine gun team finished repositioning to a spot that would give them a clean line into his foxhole. He had one option left, and it wasn't a weapon he had. It was a weapon he could build. The weapon creation scene. He'd studied all 3 of these platforms since he was old enough to hold a file steady. The bar's ferocious rate of fire and the way its gas system, when functioning, could put 20 rounds downrange faster than anything else on the position. The Thompson's close quarters stopping power and its simple, forgiving blowback action. The M1 carbine's light weight, its clean-feeding magazine, and a bolt and extractor mechanism that, unlike the damaged bar, hadn't taken any battle damage at all. The bar's problem wasn't its firepower. It was its gas system, fouled, cracked, incapable of cycling reliably. The carbine's clean, undamaged operating rod and extractor were the wrong caliber to simply swap in, but its trigger group and hammer spring were intact, standardized, and critically, close enough in dimension to the bar's fire control components that a man who had spent a childhood filing metal to exact tolerance could make them work together if he had no other choice and 30 seconds to prove it. His hands worked by feel in the dark, the way his father's had. He stripped the bar's damaged trigger assembly with a bent multi-tool blade he'd carried since Alabama, the same folded tool from his boot, out in the open now for the first time in 11 months, because there was no time left to be sentimental about where it stayed. He filed down a locking lug from the carbine's bolt assembly against the bar's receiver rail, using a rock as a work surface, and the freezing air as the only thing slowing his hands down enough to be precise, instead of frantic. He wasn't building a new weapon so much as forcing two wounded ones to cover for each other's injuries. The bar's stripped-down receiver and barrel, now hand-cycled instead of gas-operated, fed by taped-together Thompson magazines jury-rigged into the bar's magazine well with wire pulled from a fence post buried under the snow. It would not fire automatic anymore. That capability was gone, sacrificed for reliability. What he built instead was a heavy, hand-cycled battle rifle that could put a .30 caliber round through anything in front of him every time he worked the bolt, slower than the bar was designed to be, but a weapon that would fire every single time he pulled the trigger, which the bar alone could no longer promise. The scarred edge of his own palm, freshly torn from working cold metal without gloves, pressed against the stock as he tested the action for the first time. It cycled clean. Enemy POV. OBERLUTNANTKLAUSRENNER. Tree line 446 HOURS. Renner has lost 4 men to a single position that intelligence told him was empty of resistance. He orders his sergeant to flank left, expecting to find a machine gun nest, a crew-served weapon, multiple shooters, something that explains the volume and precision of the fire. What his sergeant reports back makes no tactical sense. One position, one weapon signature, one man. Renner tells him to check again. This is not dismissal anymore. This is the first time tonight he has felt something he does not have a German military term for. At 5:03 hours, the German platoon attempted a coordinated rush from 2 directions at once, a textbook doctrine against a single defended position, overwhelming force converging from angles a lone defender couldn't cover simultaneously. For 11 seconds, it worked. A round grazed Marrow's left shoulder, spinning him against the foxhole wall, and for the first time all night he felt something close to giving up, not a thought, more a physical sensation, like his body deciding on its own that this was the moment to stop. His vision narrowed. His hands, slick now with blood he hadn't noticed until it hit the cold air, fumbled the bolt on his hybrid weapon and didn't catch it clean. His left hand moved to his boot, empty. The tool wasn't there, it was still in his other hand, still warm from the work, still part of the weapon now instead of separate from it. He realized in the middle of nearly dying that the object and the decision had become the same thing. There was nothing left to reach for that wasn't already in his hands. Something in that shifted. Not resolve exactly, something quieter than resolve. He worked the bolt again. It caught clean. 5:07 hours. 11 minutes before the German advance would break entirely, though nobody in that tree line knew that yet. The first peak came fast and ugly. The two-pronged rush that had grazed his shoulder collapsed when Marrow, firing his hybrid rifle from a braced kneeling position, put down the lead element of the left flank team in under 4 seconds. 4 aimed shots, 4 hits, the kind of shooting that stops being about training and becomes about a man who has nothing left to lose being extremely calm about it. The right flank team hesitated. Hesitation against a defended position is its own kind of casualty. 5:12 hours. The second peak nearly ended everything. The machine gun team, finally repositioned, opened sustained fire across the front of his position, forcing him flat and pinning him for almost 90 full seconds, 90 seconds where he could not return fire, could not move, could only listen to rounds chewing through the frozen dirt 8 inches above his head and wonder, with a clarity that surprised him, whether this was simply how it ended. His right hand found the scar on his father's tool where it lay against the rifle stock, worn smooth in one place from 11 months of quiet handling. He didn't think about his father in words. He thought about a wagon wheel and a hand that didn't let go when it should have, and a hand that didn't let go when it shouldn't have either, and how you never knew which one you were doing until it was already finished. He moved. 5:18 hours, 3 minutes. That's how long the third peak took, the final act, the one that made it into the report, the one witnesses on both sides would describe differently for the rest of their lives, though every version agreed on the essential shape of it. One man left his position, moved laterally through open ground under direct machine gun fire, and used the confusion of his own hybrid rifle's odd, unfamiliar report. A sound the German gun crew had never heard before and couldn't immediately identify, to close distance and eliminate the machine gun team at close range before they adjusted fire onto him. "Stop, look at what just happened." Merrow's position, St. Vive sector, December 21st, 1944, 03470530 hours. Before, enemy force, approximately 2830 soldiers, 1 general-purpose machine gun, 1 Panzerfahrakt-armed fire team, advancing in coordinated formation, American forces available to Merrow at the point of consolidation. 1 man, 1 damaged bar, 1 Thompson dry, 1 recovered carbine, 1 hand-modified hybrid rifle. After confirmed enemy casualties, 9 killed, approximately 6 wounded, remainder withdrawing in disorder, position held, denying the platoon's route to the St. Vive crossroads, American lives protected by the delay. Estimated 40-plus men from the retreating column who would otherwise have been overtaken on open road, rounds expended by Merrow across the engagement. Approximately 140 time elapsed. 1 hour, 43 minutes. 1 man. Those numbers sit with that. Enemy POV, OBRLUTNANT tree line, 5:32 hours. Renner stands over the wrecked machine gun position and does not immediately give an order, which his sergeant will remember later as unusual. Renner always gives an order. What he finally says, quietly, almost to himself, is that he has fought since Poland and has never lost a platoon-strength advance to a single rifleman. He does not call it luck. He does not call it a fluke of terrain. He tells his sergeant to withdraw and report the position as unresolved rather than cleared. And for the rest of his life, in the accounts he gives after the war, he will describe that hour as the moment he understood that courage and desperation from a distance look exactly the same, and up close, they are the only thing that ever actually wins. Then silence. Not relief, not celebration, just the sound of wind moving through trees that an hour earlier had been full of gunfire and now weren't. Merrow lowered the hybrid rifle, and his hands, steady through all of it, finally started shaking. Somewhere behind him, 700 yards down the frozen road, The surviving column of his own convoy heard the fighting stop and didn't know yet whether that meant it was over or whether it meant the position had fallen. Every one of them assumed the worst. Every one of them was wrong. The position held. That's the part the after-action report captured, a single sentence, buried in a longer document about the broader defense of the St. Vive corridor during the opening days of the Bulge, noting that elements of a quartermaster company delayed enemy advance sufficiently to permit reorganization of the line. It did not mention Elijah Marrow by name. Staff Sergeant Halloran, who had ordered the retreat and abandoned the position himself, was the senior surviving NCO to file the report. His account credited effective defensive fire from the position, without specifying who had provided it. Marrow was awarded nothing at the time. He was not put forward for commendation. When his company commander was informed, second-hand, that a private had apparently held a position alone against a platoon-strength assault, the response recorded in the unit diary was a single skeptical line questioning whether the account had been exaggerated by a panicked survivor. He went back to driving trucks 11 days later. Nobody asked him what happened in that foxhole. He never volunteered it. Witness testimony, Corporal Theodore Oyelaran, surviving convoy member, account given 1987. I was 700 yards back and I heard that hybrid weapon fire, a sound none of us recognized, not the bar, not a Thompson, something in between. We didn't know what it was. We just knew the German machine gun stopped and it didn't start again. When we finally reached the position at first light, Marrow was sitting with his back against the dirt wall, still holding the rifle he'd built, and there was a little metal tool sitting open on his knee like he'd forgotten to close it. He never told any of us what that tool was. I've wondered about it for 40 years. Marrow survived the war. He returned to Talladega County in the fall of 1945, reopened his father's forge, and ran it for the next 31 years without ever giving a newspaper interview, without ever attending a unit reunion, without, as far as any surviving record shows, ever telling his own family the full account of that night outside St. Vive. It wasn't until 1987, when a military historian researching black soldiers overlooked combat contributions during the Bulge cross-referenced Corporal Oyelaran's account with a fragmentary German prisoner debriefing that mentioned an unidentified, irregular weapon encountered near St. Vive, that the full shape of the story came back together, pieced from two sides of a battle that neither side had fully recorded. The moral weight of that 90 seconds in Part 4, the decision that shifted fire away from himself and toward a wounded man's position, appears nowhere in Marrow's own words, because Marrow left no words about it at all. It exists only in the German prisoner debriefing, which notes, without elaboration, that the wounded soldier did not survive the engagement. Historians who have studied the account since have chosen not to resolve what that means about the man who built a rifle out of broken parts and held a forest by himself. Neither will this one. He never received a medal. In 1998, a small county historical marker was placed near the forge, not for the battle, which was still barely documented at the time, but simply reading, Isaiah and Elijah Marrow, blacksmiths, 1910–1998. His war record wasn't mentioned. He died that same year at 76, and the marker still stands. The hand-forged multi-tool, the one his father made, the one that spent that night doing the work of a weapon and a memory at the same time, was found among his personal effects when his family cleared the forge after his death. It's held today by a great-niece in Birmingham, who, until a researcher contacted her in 2019, had no idea the small folded tool sitting in a kitchen drawer had ever left Talladega County at all. There are thousands of stories like this one still sitting in unit diaries, prisoner debriefings, and family kitchen drawers. Men who held ground nobody assigned them to hold, using tools nobody thought to give them, and who came home and never said a word about it because the world they came home to had already decided what kind of story it was willing to hear. Elijah Marrow's story almost joined that silence permanently. There is one detail the record does not resolve. In the same German prisoner debriefing that first confirmed the irregular weapon encountered outside St. Vive, there's a single line, easy to miss, noting that the wounded soldier left behind that night was found the next morning roughly 60 yards from where he'd fallen, moved, according to the report, though by whom and for what reason was never established. No American patrol reported returning to that stretch of tree line. Elijah Marrow never spoke about that night to anyone who left a written account. He died in 1998. No one ever asked him about it. Maybe it means nothing, or maybe it means everything. If this story found you, if his name meant nothing to you an hour ago and now it means something, leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here in this comment section where history forgot to put one. Subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found.